All right, so are you ready to dive into Sapiens today?
Oh, absolutely. This book is like a roadmap of humanity, right? Like, where did we come from? How did we get to this point? And what's next? It's a wild ride.
You really weren't kidding when you said this one was going to be a mind bender?
It really makes you question everything you thought you knew about being human, right? Like, we all know humans are unique, but Harari really digs deep into what makes Homo sapiens so special.
Out of all those human species wandering around back then, why us?
Exactly. Why did Homo sapiens end up taking over the planet? And it's not just because we're all geniuses, right?
Some days I certainly don't feel like much of a sapient.
Exactly. And Harari even says that our big brains were kind of a gamble. They definitely gave us some advantages, but they also came with some downsides.
Like what?
Well, we weren't as physically strong as other primates, for one. And those big brains of ours require a ton of energy to function.
True. That makes you appreciate the efficiency of a good night's sleep even more.
Right. So the question is, how did we go from scavenging for scraps to, like, inventing the internet and everything? What's the secret ingredient?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question right there.
Well, Harari's big idea is that it all boils down to our ability to cooperate in massive numbers. And that comes from what he calls imagined realities.
Okay, wait, hold up. Imagined reality, you're going to have to explain that one because it sounds like we're about to dive into some, like, Matrix-level simulation theory.
It's not quite that out there, but it's close. Basically, it's all about the stories we tell ourselves. The things we collectively agree are true, even if they don't physically exist.
So you're saying, like, those things we believe in, even though we can't see them or touch them?
Exactly, like nations, religions, corporations, money. These are all imagined realities.
Hold on, are you saying money isn't real? I'm pretty sure I checked my bank account this morning and, well, it seemed pretty real to me.
I hear you. I look at mine too. But that number you saw, it only has power because we've all collectively decided that it does. It's like a shared fiction, a story we tell ourselves to make this whole complex system of trade and exchange work.
Oh, okay. You just blew my mind a little bit. I never thought of it like that before.
It's a wild concept, right? And it's not just money either. Think about nations. A border is just an imaginary line on a map until we give it meaning, until we imbue it with all these ideas of belonging, identity, and even reasons to go to war.
So you mean to tell me we're all just living by these invisible rules, these made-up stories that somehow shape our entire world?
Pretty much. It's both fascinating and a little terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit of both, for sure. But you know what else is amazing?
Right.
It's that same ability to unite around those shared myths and beliefs that allowed us to do some truly incredible things.
Oh, absolutely. Like what?
Like build pyramids, launch rockets into space,
Yeah.
create these global economic systems that connect us all.
It's like this invisible force. The power of collective belief took us from huddling around fires to building skyscrapers.
It's really quite incredible when you think about it that way.
And it all started, according to Harari, with that crucial shift from foraging to farming. And this is where things get really interesting.
Oh, why is that? Because I always thought the whole farming thing was like the big turning point for civilization.
You'd think so, right? But Harari argues that this transition wasn't necessarily an upgrade for humanity. In fact, he calls agriculture history's biggest fraud.
Wait, what? You're
Mm.
telling me that giving up the hunter-gatherer life for a life on the farm was actually a bad move?
You heard me right. We'll dive into that more after a quick break.
So before the break, we were talking about agriculture being history's biggest fraud. I mean, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around that one.
Right. It does sound kind of crazy when you put it like that.
Yeah, because like everyone always talks about how farming was this huge leap forward for humanity. Like it's how we went from wandering around in the wilderness to building cities and stuff.
That's the story we've always told ourselves, right? But Harari makes a really compelling case that it wasn't all sunshine and roses. In fact, he argues that in many ways, the transition to agriculture actually made life harder for a lot of people.
Okay, I'm listening. How so?
Well, for starters, think about the lifestyle change. It's a huge shift to go from being a hunter-gatherer, roaming free, to being tied to a piece of land and having to work it day in and day out.
Yeah, that does not sound like my idea of a good time. I'm not exactly what you'd call the outdoorsy type.
Right. And on top of that, farming is hard work. Like really hard work. And it's not like you get to clock out at 5 o'clock and call it a day. You're constantly at the mercy of the elements. Drought, floods, pests, you name it.
Yeah, you got a point there. Farming is definitely not for the faint of heart.
And to make matters worse, the food that early farmers were able to grow just wasn't as diverse or as nutritious as the diets of hunter-gatherers who had a wider variety of food sources available to them. So they ended up working harder for a less nutritious diet. Not exactly a recipe for a happy and healthy life.
So more work, worse food. And let's not forget about all the new diseases that started popping up once people started living in close proximity to each other and to livestock.
You're hitting all the key points. The rise of agriculture led to increased population density, which created the perfect breeding ground for all sorts of nasty infectious diseases. So, yeah, not exactly the good old days.
Okay, I'm starting to see why Harari calls agriculture history's biggest fraud. But if that's the case, why do you think our ancestors went for it?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it gets to the heart of what Harari calls the luxury trap. This idea that our pursuit of comfort and security, our desire for an easier life, can sometimes lead us down a path that's ultimately not in our best interests.
It's like we're constantly chasing after something that we think will make us happy. But then we get it, and it's not quite what we expected. Or even worse, it creates a whole new set of problems.
Exactly. And I think the transition to agriculture is a perfect example of that. Our ancestors saw an opportunity to create a more stable and predictable food supply.
Yeah.
And on the surface, that probably seemed like a pretty good deal. But what they didn't realize was that it would come at a cost.
And that cost is something that we're still grappling with today. Whether it's the challenges of feeding a global population, the environmental impact of industrial agriculture, or the health consequences of our modern diets.
It's all connected. And it makes you wonder about the luxury traps that we might be falling into today without even realizing it.
Right, like what new technologies or conveniences are we embracing that might seem great in the short term, but could lead to unforeseen consequences down the road.
Exactly. But, there's another really interesting wrinkle in this whole agriculture story that Harari brings up.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Gobekli Tepe.
Gobekli Tepe. Okay, so before we get into that, can you give me a little refresher? What is Gobekli Tepe again? It sounds kind of familiar, but...
So Gobekli Tepe is this incredible archaeological site in Turkey, and it's basically blowing everyone's minds because it dates back to around 9500 BC, which is thousands of years before anyone thought large-scale societies were even a thing.
Wow, 9500 BC. That's going way back.
Yeah.
So what makes it so special?
Well, for starters, it's huge. We're talking massive stone structures, intricate carvings. It's like nothing else from that time period. And here's the kicker. It was built by hunter-gatherers.
Get out of here. No way. You're telling me that these hunter-gatherers, who we thought were just wandering around chasing mammoths, were actually capable of building something this complex?
That's what's so incredible about it. It completely upends our traditional understanding of human history and how societies develop. It suggests that these early hunter-gatherers were capable of much more than we ever gave them credit for.
Okay, so now I really need to hear more about this because my mind is officially blown. But let's save that for after the break, because I have a feeling we're about to go even deeper down the rabbit hole. So Gobekli Tepe really threw us for a loop. It's like finding a smartphone buried in a medieval castle. You just don't expect it.
It really makes you question everything we thought we knew about our ancestors, right? Like maybe they weren't so primitive after all. Maybe there's a lot more we can learn from them. And from that time period when humans were first starting to experiment with the power of collective belief.
Yeah, it's like Gobekli Tepe is this giant question mark in the timeline of human history.
Yeah.
A reminder that we don't have all the answers yet.
It's humbling, isn't it? And that brings us back to our conversation about the French Revolution and how it represents a shift in imagined realities.
Because even removing a king and completely overhauling a power structure, ultimately that all comes down to a change in the story that people believe.
Right. Exactly. Suddenly the old story, the one where kings ruled by divine, right? Didn't hold water anymore. The people created a new narrative, one where power resided in the hands of the people. And they fought tooth and nail to make that new story a reality.
And that's something that's happening all the time throughout history, right? These shifts in what we value, what we believe, what we're willing to fight for.
Absolutely. And it makes you realize that the future isn't set in stone. We're not just along for the ride. We actually have a say in shaping those narratives that guide us.
It's both empowering and a little daunting.
True.
Right? Because if we're the ones writing the story, then we're also responsible for the ending.
Precisely. And that leads us to what might be the most mind-blowing part of Sapiens, Harari's exploration of where humanity might be headed next.
Okay, so where are we headed? Give us the TLDR version, because this book has already taken us on quite the journey.
Fasten your seatbelts, because Harari doesn't hold back. He argues that with all our advancements in biotechnology, AI cybernetics, we're on the verge of being able to design not just our world, but ourselves.
Okay, well, hold up. Did you say design ourselves? Like we're talking full-on creating our own evolution?
You got it. We're talking about transcending our biological limitations,
Wow.
eradicating diseases, enhancing our cognitive abilities, maybe even extending our lifespans indefinitely. It's like we're becoming the gods we used to imagine holding the power to fundamentally alter life itself.
Okay, that is both amazing and terrifying at the same time. But like what would that even look like? Are we talking designer babies, cyborgs, uploading our consciousnesses into the cloud?
All of the above, and then some. Harari doesn't give us all the answers, and that's part of what makes his book so thought-provoking. He just lays out the possibilities and challenges us to grapple with the implications.
I think it's safe to say that Sapiens has given us a lot to think about. From the dawn of humanity to the future we're creating right now. It's been quite a ride.
It really has. And if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this deep dive, it's that the story of humanity is still being written. And we all have a role to play in shaping that story. So go out there, ask big questions, challenge your assumptions, and let's see what incredible narratives we can create together.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder all the fascinating ideas we've explored today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Sapiens. We'll see you next time.